All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Timely Topics this afternoon. We're really excited to have you. I'm Jennifer Matthew, the Executive Director of the Connecticut Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And I have here with me, Rory.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Great to see so many names and faces joining us this afternoon. I am the Assistant Director of Communication and Programming at CCEI, and I'm really excited to share this Timely Topics with you this week.
Yeah. So Rory and I often joke all the time that our sessions between the two of us should be recorded because we have little nuggets of wisdom that we wish we could remember and recall. But these are conversations that Rory and I have together with our team at CCEI, with entrepreneurs. And so to be able to actually have this in a live session that we're just kind of chatting things out, hopefully engaging all of you in some thought-provoking questions and conversations, we're just really feeling grateful to have you all here and be able to have this platform to do this. So today's discussion is identifying and refining your values. So if you don't know Rory and I, you don't know that we talk about values all the time and the importance that those values have on who we are, what we do, and the success that we have in the businesses we lead, our families, organizations we're a part of. So this conversation is all about being authentic, talking about the self-awareness and how it's key to our success as entrepreneurs, because that's how many of us here know each other and work and function at CCI, but also as individuals. So in this session, we're going to take a step back and examine how our values are influencing decisions we make, how people perceive us, and ultimately the impact we have on our businesses.
You know, Jen, we talk about this all the time, but I'm loving the fact that Timely Topics is taking a giant step back today to help everybody in all walks of life make it a little bit easier to make the tens of thousands of decisions that we have to make every single day. So if you're joining us today as an entrepreneur, you're welcome. If you're joining us as a professional, you're welcome. But chances are, more than anything, you're joining us as you. Right. And so a lot's been made and talked about in the last several years about this concept of authenticity, probably a byproduct of the pandemic, saying, let me get introspective. Like, who am I and what am I doing with my time? And as you came out of that hibernation in many ways, you likely probably had a newfound appreciation for not only your authenticity, but hopefully for the authenticity of those around you. So one of the things that Jen and we often try to pass on to our startup teams, but we also try to help each other with, is saying, when you have a decision to make, right, and you're apprehensive, right, you're not sure, should we hire this person, right? Should we scale? Should we grow? Should we take on this investor? Is it time to press send on that email campaign? And you're wondering, where do I get advice from? And you probably take on advice from all sorts of sources, from podcasts to the people in your life. One of the things about today is just to say, what if I started deep inside of me and I asked myself, right, what are my core values? And if this decision is going to ally predominantly and with great magnitude with my core value, then it's probably a good decision, because at the end of the day, we have to live with ourselves and we have to live with our decisions. And so we have found for many entrepreneurs, especially what we learned over the years, is like they have great apprehension, right? Sometimes they can be scared or nervous or worried. They're concerned about failure, right? But we would say, whether you are successful or whether you fail, if you are following your process, if you are following your North Star of values, then you are on the right journey. You are on the right path, and you will ultimately land right where you were supposed to be. Now, all of that sounds relatively high level and abstract. So let's bring it down to some theory for a moment, right? So I've been studying communication for many years, and we have a theory of uncertainty reduction. And uncertainty reduction basically posits that human beings are innately programmed with a need to reduce uncertainty. And you're not surprised by this, right? Most of us in here, we don't really like surprises. We don't like uncertainty. We don't like the feelings of anxiety when we go into a space or a phase that we do not know, and we do not know what to expect. So what do? We are programmed as human beings to reduce uncertainty as quickly and as easily as possible. And what we're going to do today is work with all of you to try to, first and foremost, reduce some uncertainty about yourselves, so that in turn, you can begin to reduce uncertainty about your audiences. So I'm going to make one very simple hypothesis, and that is that if you can successfully reduce uncertainty with yourself and your audiences, you will have more successful communication encounters and likely feel more satisfied with the decisions that you make throughout your life.
So let's talk a little bit more about these values. So what are they, why they're important, and how can we start to identify what they are? within us. So I know Rory and I have been doing this journey within ourselves for a long period of time. And I can say personally, it's not something that came to me right away. I didn't understand or necessarily connect with my values at the, right when I started college or right after I graduated. It took a series of life events and things to happen to really crystallize some of this for me. And so Rory, would you want to just share a little bit about what you value and maybe how you arrived at that core value?
Yeah, it's such a difficult question, Jen. And by the way, we're going to buy you all a good amount of time right now because we're going to ask you to share yours momentarily. So if you're not listening to me at any moment, I know that you're just thinking about what it is that you'd like to say. But when we pose this question to individuals in our workshops and our sessions and our development opportunities, we'll say to folks, what do you value, right? And for some who have deeply thought about it, it's right there, tip of the tongue. They know because it guides the decision making. But I reckon that everybody has a core value, whether you've thought about it or not, because it influences the decisions that you make. So let's talk a little bit about how you can uncover your core value if you're joining us today and you're not entirely sure. And the first thing that I would invite you to do is think about what you do with the vast majority of your time. So aside from the time that you spend sleeping and aside from the time that you spend eating, you spend the rest of your day doing things. And there is no greater reflection of your values than your behaviors, because the rest of the world is only going to be able to perceive and receive you based on what you do, not necessarily what you think, not necessarily what you feel, but by what you behave. And therefore, one of the ways in which I would think about and help others to think about processing their core values is to say, well, what do you do with the 16 or so hours that are remaining in your day when you get out of bed and you go forth into the world? What do you find yourself doing? Those are a reflection of your core values. And so I want you to think this morning, right? We're a few hours into the day. It's noon. What have you done with your day? And what decisions did you make this morning over the last 6 or 7 hours, depending on what time you got up at? What decisions did you make? And if you could look back and say, why did I make the decision to go to the gym? Why did I make the decision to have a certain breakfast? Why did I make the decision to sleep in? Why did I make the decision to skip the meeting so that I could bring my daughter to school? Why did I make the decision to do this thing? That's going to help you on this first part of the journey, which is saying that my behaviors are indicative of my values. Let me raise one very important point. There are values that we live and there are values that we aspire to. And today, we're focusing on the values that you live. And the best way for you to start to uncover that, of course, is by understanding what it is that you do. So check this out. Here's how I would have gone through it, right? I would have thought about all the things that I had done. And then I would have started to extrapolate and say, is there something that ties all of these things together? And for those of you who have heard me in a session before, I quite explicitly like to tell people my number one core value is communication. Because for me, my mantra is that communication is at the heart of all great relationships. And therefore, my intentionality towards communication, right? My desire to pursue it as an interest, to learn about it, to talk about it, right? To receive other people's perspectives, it accentuates my value. And with that serves as a guide to ask myself a very simple question, right? If I go to do this thing, will it represent my value of communication? So if I send a message or do not send a message, does it represent that value? If I behave in a certain way, does it represent that value? And so for all of you, as we're here, right, I'm going to start to say, let's think about what they are. But before we do that, Jen, I would love to hear a little bit about what your core values are.
Yeah. And so as I've done this and dug in a little bit, a lot of research and those that write about thought leadership around values talk about having 3 to 5 that are really core to who you are. And you have narrowed it down to 1. I think you embody that. Everyone here on this call that knows you can be like, communication. Yep. And that's definitely Rory, 100%. I feel like there's a few that tie into who I am. I'm going to stick to my top 2, which is inspiration and creativity. And I know that based on my purpose, my mission, my vision of my life, I create environments for people to experience connection and possibility in a deeper way than they ever have before. And I use that mission or mantra statement as what I do across the board. It's not just what I do at CCEI, but it's what I do with my family and my friends. It's what I create in my businesses. It's how I interact with people I'm mentoring, with businesses I'm supporting. It's the way in which I want to live my life. And I think that those values of inspiration, creativity tie so directly into those pieces that they act as that compass, that guide for me. Is this inspiring to me and to others? Am I making an impact? Am I being creative? Am I giving myself the opportunity to create? Because that's the point when I've figured out where I'm not most successful in my life is when I'm doing things where I'm not creating. I'm not standing from a place of creation and opportunity. And so that's helped to guide me to make quite a few decisions in what I want to be involved in and what I don't want to put my energy and effort towards.
Jen, one of the things that stands out to me is asking folks, does your identity in the workplace transcend to other places? Does your identity in home transcend to the workplace? I had brought up the pandemic earlier only because I think for so many people around the world, it was an opportunity for their work life and their home life to come together, right, for many months. And I would imagine that there were many people who walked away from that experience saying, my work life and my home life, they do not mesh, and therefore I need to make a change. I need to make a change in my home. I need to make a change in my professional career. And that was profound for them. So one of the things that we would be inviting you to think about today is asking yourself, do my values at home transcend to work? And do my values at work transcend to where I volunteer? Such that, right, when I leave any room and we are asking about that individual, what do you think Jen Matthew values, right? Is the answer as clear and obvious to us as it is to her, right? Does she transcend those values in every space in which she enters? Now, why do we think and why do we recommend this for not only entrepreneurs, but for everybody? Is because it's going to make it easier for you to press send, for you to share your authentic self. And I'm going to give you a very quick anecdote. I've often thought about wanting to share thought leadership, but I've never been quite certain or sure what channel I should do it through, or if anybody actually cared what I had to say. And while I still may not be sure if that's true, one of the things that was brought to my attention by Jen at one point was to say, if your value of communication is so important to you, then your desire and interest and willingness to share it ultimately becomes an avenue for you to just simply accentuate and to live the behavior, to live the value. So what I'm inviting us all to do right now is I want you to think deeply about what are the core values that you hold. And one of the ways that I sometimes can help people unlock what really stands out to them is, let me ask you this. Would you be willing to maintain that value even if it became a competitive disadvantage, right? So a true lived value is one that you will not waver on, right? One that you hold to your core, because to you, it defines what you are all about. It defines what you do. It defines the people you bring into your life. It defines what you ultimately will be when many years from now you leave this place. So if we could, let's make this interactive, right? You've been listening to us for the last 13 minutes, and that's probably plenty. Let's hear from you. So, Michelle, it's great to see you on here. Julie, Owen, Rachel, Roy, Shay, Thomas, Deborah, Kate, Michaela, if you're on the call, we want to hear from you. If you would just take a moment and you can share your values. One thing that I will share, one thing that's so important right now, when you share this value with us, let me invite you to do something incredibly empowering. Do not feel compelled to rationalize or to explain or to justify your value. It is yours. It needs no explanation. It is yours, and that is what it means to you. And it doesn't necessarily matter what it means to anybody else right now. As long as you understand it and you live it, then it is true. So please, we invite you to share your values in the chat, and maybe I'll kick things off and I'll go ahead and type mine in here right now. Good to see you on here, Roy. Owen, thank you. Great to see some answers rolling in from our CCI colleagues who we've engaged on this task in the last several months. That's pretty on brand, Julie. Great to hear from you. Thanks for joining us. Shay, love it. Love it. We know that. We know that about Shay. So as you're answering here, I want you to start to think about something that you've done today that is representative of that value. I want you to think about the last person that you interacted with coming off this call. And did you leave them with something that shares a sentiment, that shares a artifact of what that value is to you? Because one of the things that becomes so important is that after we raise our self-awareness, after we become keenly aware, as you all have done, that values are driving your decisions, the next thing that has to happen in the self-awareness process is you have to ensure that those around you are aware of your value. Now, how can you do this? So let's start by asking that very first question. So you're motivated right now. You're excited like I am. You're saying, you know what, Rory, I'm with you. Jen, I'm with you. I want to make sure that my values are at the forefront of who I am. So how do you go about doing that? What are some mechanisms? What are some tactics, Jen, that you might use to ensure that when you walk out of a room and we say, what are Jen's values, that we are very easily able to identify that it's creativity and that it's inspiration?
Yeah. So actually one of the tactics that I use every morning is the, how do I want to show up today? So it's part of a journaling prompt that I do, but it's also a way in which I just think, how do I want to be today? And who do I want to show up as? Who do I need to show up as, right? Like my day on a Saturday when I'm showing up for my family might look a little bit different. So I think about that version of myself and how I bring that to the table, and always think about through the lens of my values, how exactly I'm doing that. I find myself being inspired actually fuels my inspiration to other people. So I need to surround myself by things that are inspirational to me. So podcast, talking with people, having great conversations like we're having right now, being around people that kind of fuel that fire for me. And then it allows me to transcend that and to hand that off. And, Rory and I had a really great conversation earlier this morning about something that was a little inspirational and touching to both of us. And he left the call. He left me with a little nugget of advice. And he said, go off and take this to the next person you talk to and leave them with something. And like, that to me was the inspiration I needed to continue that journey of inspiration that I had today. So that's my little nugget of the way that I integrate it. Is one is intention, and then surrounding yourself with the people that can help leverage that strength and that value for you.
That's awesome, Jen, because I think so many of us, right, as we continue to grow and age and build our network, we have tough decisions like who's going to get our energy? Who's going to get us? And if you're struggling right now with a relationship in your life, whether it be at home, in the workplace, right, asking yourself, like, does this relationship accentuate my value? Does it celebrate my value? Does it allow me to feel as if my value is empowered or taken to the next level? And if the answer is no, then you've got really probably a fairly easy decision, right? That relationship may not be at the right point right now, right? Or it may never be at the right point, because I said this in a newsletter that I sent out this morning. One of the things that's really profound to me, right? And it just happened. Scroll through your answers, right? We have, 14, 15 people on the call, and I think I see one potential overlap in a value. And yet we all have 100% agreement on what effective communication looks like, right? The exchange of an idea from one person to another in the way that both people understand and appreciate the idea. So think about this, right? If you want to communicate in your business, if you want to be a more successful entrepreneur, you go into those investor meetings, you go into your stakeholders, to your clients, to your customers, and you have a value and they have a different value. And how are you going to find alignment? It's by having an awareness of recognizing that sometimes we don't value the same things. And sometimes that can be good because it provides balance in our businesses and in our lives. And sometimes it just means we might not be compatible. We might not be compatible in a relationship. We might not be compatible to do business with. I'm going to give everybody my tactic, Jen. And one of the things that's really worked profoundly for me over the years to help identify communication as a value is I like to think a lot about vernacular or vocabulary. So one of the things I would invite folks to do, if you're still with us, right? So Kate, take creativity and go ahead and punch it into the thesaurus, right? Rachel, ask yourself, right, what is integrity? And look at those synonyms. And now I'm going to challenge you to take 5 or 6 of those synonyms today and bring them into your vocabulary. You're all going to leave here. You're hopefully enjoying your lunch right now. You're going to go to a meeting this afternoon. You're going to have an opportunity to express, to talk, to share. I challenge you, bring the synonyms of your values into your language. The best way to leave a residual behind is the way that you make people feel. And the way that you make people feel predominantly, right, in the workplace especially, is through words, right, is through words. Now, some of you that have values where maybe it's gift giving, right, or other signs of affection, that's great probably in the home. But at work, we use our words, and that includes your emails. That includes your email signatures. So one of the things that we want to talk a little bit about, Jen, is we want to make sure we leave some opportunity to talk about what are some other tactics and strategies. And it stands out to me that we've been talking a lot about authenticity, self-awareness, and values. But for some folks on the call, right, we saw Shay was able to answer so quickly, right? We saw Deborah was able to answer so quickly, really feeling compelled. And so for some folks here today, it's like, all right, I know what my values are. What's next, right? And so, Jen, can you talk a little bit about kind of like the intersection for you where values meet brand and some tactics that you've actually used in your life to bring your values into what you consider to be your personal brand as well as your business brand?
That's fantastic. So I think the business piece is one that some of us struggle with as an entrepreneur, especially when you're a solopreneur or launching something. You want to feel good about the mission and vision of what you're creating because you're bringing something new into this universe, into this world, and you want it to hopefully align with who you are and what does that look like as the company grows. And I think about that through the personal branding standpoint as well. How does my values transcend just the what I'm doing? And we're often feeling compelled now to say when someone says, "Hey, Jen, nice to meet you. Tell me a little bit about yourself," right? Like the first thing we always do is we go into the, well, here's what I do for a job. This is what I spend like 40 to 80 hours a week doing. But we don't actually think about that through the lens of like, this is who I am. And I think the values is what you start off as, is this is the story, the narrative that you're telling about who you are. And you have that 20 to 30-second opportunity to make an impact. And so rather than saying what you do tactically, it's how you express the value you want to contribute out into this space and this conversation. I think that opens a lot of doors. So I think part of it is how I introduce myself, obviously in this setting. Maybe I could have practiced a little bit and showed you guys how I would introduce myself rather than telling you here in this situation, how you might know me in my role, but coming off and saying what I said before is I create environments for people to experience connection and possibility in a deeper way than they ever have before. And I'm inspired by other people and I love to create, right? So that's the kind of the way that I would start and then say, through that lens, I run a center at the university that allows entrepreneurs to take the dreams they have and make them into a reality. I leverage my team to do the same and to inspire others to be the best versions of themselves. And in my business, I create opportunities for inspiration and connection through these different facets. So I think the personal brand is around the messaging and the way that we portray ourselves when we're doing those introductions. And there's a lot of small tactics on like, how do you integrate that, as you mentioned, into your email signature? How do you put this on your LinkedIn page so people can really feel that piece of you? I know that like LinkedIn, for example, when you have the banner, like do something with that, right? Can you tie your values into that banner behind your profile picture? So those are just some general thoughts and tactics. Rory, do you want to share some other ones as well?
Yeah, what stands out to me is there's a book out there by Randy Olson called Houston, We Have a Narrative, and it introduces this concept of the and, but, therefore method. Now, one of the things that I've been using that method for is to help others to succinctly convey an idea, concept, of value proposition. So I'm going to share something with you today because I've helped others throughout the course of like executive training, right down to student or career coaching. And when we introduce ourselves, right, we have this opportunity to have a singular statement that's an and statement. And I'm going to try to make this really easy for you today, right? So what I like to do is I like to share an and statement that includes two very important things about me, right? I have previous experience, and I'll fill in that blank depending on what I think is most compelling to the audience. So for today, I might say something like, I have previous experience working in higher education for the last 17 years. That's my credibility statement. So with that one line, I have tried to convey to you, right, what it is that I do and the fact that somebody else thought it was worthwhile to employ me for at least that long, right? So I'm using my role and my responsibility at UConn as a piece of credibility that points to my expertise in some way. But the other thing that I'll say is I have worked in higher education for 17 years and I am passionate about helping others to communicate more effectively. So what I've done there, right, is I've given you my experience, right, the things that I do. And then in many ways, I've given you, why do I do that, right? Why have I been at the university for 17 years? Well, it probably provides some sort of vehicle, some sort of channel, some sort of mechanism by which I can share the value and my passion for helping others to communicate more effectively. So I invite all of you right now to just think about, what does your introductory statement look like, right? What is it that you have done that you want to share, right? What is it that you're currently doing that you want to share, right? And then tell us that your passion or your enthusiasm or your mission or your value is this thing. And right, most humans are going to be able to draw a very obvious and implied connection that the thing that you do is driven by the thing in which you have a value for. And so now you've made it very obvious and very easy for audiences, and this becomes so important, to understand what your value is. One of the last things that I want to get to here today, Jen, is because some folks might be looking, how do I put this into action with my team? Can understanding my values or somebody else's values make me more persuasive, make me more motivational, empower others, get what I want, help them get what they want? And the answer quite simply is, of course, yes. So one of the things that I'm inviting you to do is to share your values openly, explicitly, right? And that might mean going home to your partner of 20 years, sitting down at the dinner table tonight and saying, hey, look, you know what I got to tell you? I really value independence. And that therefore means that sometimes when I make decisions to go out and do things, it's because it's so important to me. My autonomy, it really defines who I am. Now, all of a sudden, your partner has an opportunity to go, oh, right. That makes so much more sense, right? If you have somebody on your team that values time, and you have somebody on your team that values their health, and you have somebody on your team that values money, you can frame your arguments and your conversations in ways that appeal to their values, right? So, Jen, if you value time and I come up to you and I say, hey, Jen, I got a really good idea, and I think it's going to make us more efficient. Jen's listening, right? If I know Michaela really values her family, right? I go up with the same solution. I say, Michaela, I've got an idea, and I think that this is going to be a way that transcends your professional career that's going to be good for not only you, but for your entire family, for generations to come. I've got Michaela's attention. So go through with your people that are close in your life and just be explicit and say, this is what I value. And a lot of times when I make decisions, it's not personal towards you, Shay. It's not personal towards you, Roy. It's about me, right? It's about the thing that I value, and that's why I'm doing that. But let me ask you, Shay, let me ask you, Roy, what do you value? Because once I know that, I can start to interpret your behaviors more accurately. And I can also present arguments to you in the light in which you need them, in which you want them. And so I invite you to do the thing that I care so much about, which is just to communicate, right? To simply ask people, go into your customers, go into your clients when you're doing those discovery sessions, Shay, as you've often done. What do you want? What do you need? What's important to you? Is it time? Is it money? Is it cost? Is it efficiency? Is it care for the students? And then use that to help frame your argument of what comes next. Simply asking will ultimately probably improve for many of you, like your brand strategies. For those of you that are having struggles with marketing or you're not sure, some of you might be saying today, I really wish I could post more on LinkedIn. I really want to grow my network, but I have no idea what the heck I'm supposed to share. Your answer, you wrote it down for us today, right? I want to see Owen sharing articles about how independence can be good for his mental health. I want to see Deborah sharing articles and continuing her brand of being somebody who is service oriented, to support and to honor others and their needs and their beliefs.
You know, Rory, this is all great. And I know at the beginning you said we're going to focus entirely on those values in which we feel like we're living and we're leading every day. But I know some of us have aspirational values, those things that we see in other people. Maybe today we've been inspired by, Rachel, as she posted a little bit about like her integrity, or Nick with honesty. And we're like, you know what? I actually really feel like I would love to value that. I would love for that to be something I could stand and say that I am. How do we give that value the opportunity to surface? How do we allow these opportunities of our aspirational values to come alive?
I suppose really in some ways, Jen, I think that's a question not for me or for you. I think that that's the question for the entire group to potentially leave here with. We have just a few minutes remaining, and I always think it's important to allow the opportunity, maybe if the participants would like to ask a question, whether it be of us or maybe a profound question, as Jen left us with, for everybody. So at this time, there's an opportunity if somebody wants to raise a hand or jump off mute. We'd love to hear from at least one or two folks before we get off.
Okay, I'll go. All right. So when you're working with teams or groups on this activity, about how often do you work on this and come back to it?
Luckily for us, we have our accountability partners here because we have our actual team that can tell you if we're telling the truth on this one. But for us, we do a strategy session every month, and the strategy is both personal strategy and strategy for the center. So we spend about 50% of that time diving into who we are, what we value, a connection as a team, and then how we can translate that into work we do at CCEI. So ours is monthly, but I can tell you in the communication that we have, through our staff meetings or like one-on-one in the center, we're always having this conversation. This is always elements of professional development, personal development. And then we've been able to play a little bit with this, right? Like we've just been very self-disclosing with each other and being able to use that as a point of strength for each other. And so we'll call each other out on things and we'll point things out. Like if someone is actually living or leading that value, pointing that out to the group or to say that. So I don't know, Rory, if you want to add anything to that, but I think the consistency of it, and being able to showcase that yourself, that you're willing to do that and you value that in other people, I think it will just create a culture on your team that's important.
Yeah, and I'm going to help us sign off with a recommendation, Shay, to just be respectful of everybody's time. Jim Collins, in his Good to Great book, one of the chapters talks a lot about the values of great companies. And I think that great companies can be great individuals. They can be great families. They can be great businesses. That's fine. And notice that Jen said during our strategy sessions, we revisit in alignment with our values. But here's what Jim would say, and this is what he found with great companies, that values will last a lifetime, right? So when you really truly have identified a value, that more often than not, they last a lifetime. And what should change and be revisited are things like tactics and strategies, right? Once a month, once a quarter, once a year, you ask yourself, does this particular tactic best deliver on my value? And that's where we want to work with teams. And that's where we want you to work on your monthly or your quarterly or your annually strategies and tactics to ensure that they're aligned. But once you've really found out what your profound value is, what your North Star is, we have found, right, that companies for over 100 years that have maintained 3 to 5 core values, those values have helped them sustain greatness, changing marketplaces, facing all of the adversity that can come in the business world. Their values served as their guide. And so today, just spending a half an hour on yourself, congratulations to all of you that came, that self-actualized, that entered your answers and spent some time thinking about it, because now you leave with the ability, hopefully, to implement strategies and tactics that feel a little bit more wholesome, that feel a little bit more authentic.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for joining us for Timely Topics. We love the opportunity to connect once a month, sometimes twice a month, with all of you in various settings like this. Timely Topics is a live podcast style session. So many of you that are listening to this are actually listening to this as a recording. So we hope that you pause during this, have the chance to actually think about your values, and then we'll go back and maybe utilize the same type of workshop with the teams you're working on. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day.